Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thank you so much for joining me and welcome to 10 little known albums that are great. So all these albums I'm going to talk about here are ones that I bought for one reason or another. Might have been who played on the album. It could have been that the artist is famous from another band. Could have just been out of pure curiosity. The thing is, they all turned out to be great, despite how little it is that music fans know about these albums. So I've gathered up 10 of them. I want to talk to you guys about it. Hopefully open you up to some of these ideas. Maybe you'll know them all. Maybe it'll just remind you of some great sort of lost albums that are in your collection and you can pull them out. But either way, we're going to run through that in just a bit. Before we get started, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also comment, like, all those things really do help my channel. Of course, if you turn on notifications, you're going to stay up to date on really cool videos. Just like this one here, 10 little known albums that are great. So no real particular order, but I did put these in alphabetically just to give it a little bit of logic here. But not one of these is, say, better than the other. They're all very different kinds of albums, but in my opinion, they're just were amazing finds. They were ones that I bought, took the chance on, put in, and it literally blew my mind. First one up, Abraxis Pull, self-titled release from 1997. And the key thing about this is that while it's their only studio album, I should even call it debut album from them, it's really a super group of musicians that were all former members of the Santana band. So they all came around the time of the Abraxas album in 1970 from Santana. So there is more to get from these guys, but of course only one album that's like this. So the band, I bought it because of the members. They're famous from other lineups, in particularly Neil Schon from Journey on guitar. I'm a big Journey fan, so actually more a fan of his work in Journey than Santana. But interestingly, buying this album here kicked off a whole Santana exploration for me, where now I am a fan of Santana, where I never had been before buying this album here. And I know that's kind of crazy, but this sort of unknown album, little known album, both was great here, but also opened me up to a whole bunch of other music. So we got Neil Schon on guitars, Greg Raleigh on keyboards and vocals, who also would go on to Journey, Michael Shreve on drums from Hagar, Shern, Arison Shreve, HSAS. We got Michael Carbello on congas, Jose Eras on timbas, and Alfonso Johnson on bass. So as I said, the key for me on this album here was Neil Schon, but where I think this differed for me and why it was the shoe-in to Santana is this sounded more like a Journey album, where Neil Schon's guitar tones were like Journey, but the music was like Santana. And I just found it to be very, very cool. I can't believe it took me 25 years to buy that album. I remember seeing it when it came out, but the music didn't grab me at that time. When I finally bought it, it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe that I had never listened to it or enjoyed it. But then again, I believe that my taste had changed in that 25 years. So I was definitely open to something that I wasn't previous to this, but turned out to be really great. Okay, next one up, Billion Dollar Babies, Battle Axe from 1977. Let me take out the actual album in here, because this is actually a little box set, and I'll talk about that one in just a second. There's the replica LP version of it and the back side of it, which I think is great. I've had a number of versions of this, but this one's the best because it finally reproduced the album art. So debut studio album and only studio album to date. However, the box set that I held up right at the beginning of this has both demos and a live album in it. So you can actually get a little bit more if you find that you really dig this. Who are Billion Dollar Babies, right? That name sounds familiar because it's named after the Alice Cooper album, the Alice Cooper Band album. And that's what this is. This is the Alice Cooper Band without Alice Cooper. We got Michael Bruce on guitar, Dennis Dunaway on bass, Neil Smith on drums, and rounding out the lineup is Bob Dolan on vocals and Mike Marconi on guitar. And I don't know a lot about them. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of information about this release or the band itself. And that's unfortunately the case with a lot of these little known albums. The reason they stay, sort of kept down and we don't know about them is that there just isn't that information out on the internet. Case in point, while I'm making this video here to try to give you guys a little bit more info about it for those of you that maybe have always seen it, didn't know what it was, want to check it out, that sort of stuff. So songs on this album were intended for the next Alice Cooper album, following Muscle of Love, I should say. The band had all taken a break to pursue solo projects, things like that, while waiting for Alice Cooper to return from his Welcome to My Nightmare, album and tour and stuff like that. The band got started on the next Alice Cooper album. Unfortunately, they realized after a period of time, a couple of years go by, that he was not going to return. And so with that being the case, they decided to make the album themselves. As the story goes, though, it didn't garner much attention at the time, and it kind of sank without a trace, unfortunately. But luckily, we got some cool, record labels that have reissued it over the years, and this one here is a really good copy of it. I think, had it been released at the time by Alice Cooper, this album here would have been hugely successful. Check out the songs Too Young, I Miss You, and Rock and Roll Radio. All three of those are great as is on this album, but if you can imagine it with Alice Cooper doing it, I think it would have been hugely successful. Unfortunately, not to be the case. All right, next one. Fandango Cadillac from 1980, fourth studio album and final by the band. I picked this up because it features none other than Joe Lynn Turner as the frontman singing. Of course, we know Joe Lynn Turner would go on to front Rainbow, have a solo career, do Deep Purple, and a number of other projects. So I was coming at this from that standpoint of, okay, who's in this band? Wow, Joe Lynn Turner, I better check this out. And this one here is one of the albums that I had in a collection of, or countdown, so to speak, of the best disco-flavored rock albums. And this one is that, but don't let that detour you from this, because it is a great album. It's just got those cool, bass lines and things to it that I think really works, and some cool keyboard parts and stuff. Personally, I think if you like his, I don't know what year it was, 84, 85, somewhere in there, his solo album, which is very keyboard laden, very 1980s. I think you would actually dig this. It's a nice cross between the 70s sound and the 80s sound there. Check out the songs Blame It on the Night, Stranger, and Hypnotized, and tell me you aren't hypnotized by hearing this album here. All right, next one, Mick Fleetwoods Zoo, I'm Not Me, from 1983. A lot of these are because they finally got issued on CD that I picked them up simply based on the name. It says right there on the top, Mick Fleetwood, and I said, well, gee, what's this all about? Second solo album, of course, from the Fleetwood Mac drummer. First under the name Zoo. This is Mick Fleetwood's Zoo. He did have a previous album called The Visitor as an actual solo album, but this is still, in my opinion, counted as a solo album here. Although there would be a follow-up to this album as The Zoo called Shaking the Cage in 1992. However, not much between the two is the same, with all of Mick Fleetwood's projects. He changes members, left and right. We've certainly seen it with Fleetwood Mac. He also does it on all of his solo projects and stuff like that. It's just the way he works. But every so once in a while, you get these albums where the musicians who he brings together to do them is just amazing. They really click. It's unfortunate that this lineup did not continue to make more albums with how great this is. We do get some cool contributions though from other Fleetwood Mac members. We get Christine McVie and Lindsey Buckingham on here. Two main musicians to contribute to this though are Billy Burnett, who's a future Fleetwood Mac member. I mean, at the time of this, he became one in the late 80s and early 90s. And then George Hawkins, who was the main musician on his debut solo album. So he's coming over and continuing and really doing well on this one here. We also get some cool songwriting credits. Carl Wilson of the Beach Boys, Lindsey Buckingham, Billy Burnett, and George Hawkins predominantly do all the songwriting on here. But the album is so good, I really think that had they just put this out under the Fleetwood Mac name, you know, had there been a falling out, the band had broken up or something, and this was a new version, would have been successful. I'm not saying it should have replaced that. It's just that that's how good I think that this album is. Check out the opening track, Angel Come Home, which is the song co-written by Carl Wilson. And I think that will tell you everything you need to know about this album. All right, next one up, we're moving over to some vinyl because I don't think this has ever been issued to CD, and if it has, not as a standalone copy, Flint. And this is their self-titled 1978 album. You can see it's actually 5 guys back there, but the 3 guys that are on the front, and the reason that I picked this up here is that we've got Don Brewer on drums and vocals, Mel Shasher, and I apologize if I butchered that name, on bass, and Craig Frost keyboards. Those 3 guys are from Grand Funk Railroad, and when Grand Funk disbanded, they formed Flint, Michigan, which is where Grand Funk is from. But of course, on the back, I pointed out there's actually 5 guys, so they're rounded out by Ron Tromley and Chuck Rowe. So basically, this band here, Flint, is Grand Funk Railroad minus Mark Farner. And Mark was the frontman and guitar player, but he didn't sing everything. So we still have Don Brewer. You have his classic vocals that you know and love. And we got the other 2 guys in there. So 3 of the 4 members. And I've got to say, this album here is amazing. Unfortunately, there's really, really little information on this album out there. So I don't have a lot to tell you about it. But again, I think the music can do the talking on this album. For me, there's a couple cover songs on here, but mostly originals. But whether they're doing a cover song like Back in My Arms Again, or they're doing an original song like the second track on here, you got it all wrong. I think it's killer from start to finish. If you are a Grand Funk Railroad fan, you want some more stuff because they haven't recorded in decades at this point, check out Flint. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. All right, next one up. AC/DC frontman Brian Johnson and Strange Man from 1982. Debut and only solo album, and I'll put a little asterisk next to that, and I'll talk about it in a minute. I am showing you a CD version, and I'm sure some of you guys are saying, wait a minute, I never thought that was issued to CD. That's because I made this one. But I made it from scanning the artwork of this, so I do have the vinyl version of this as well. And I'm going to talk about some other versions of it in a minute here, but why I'm saying, putting a little asterisk next to this, is that it's debatable whether or not this is actually a solo album, because it's really songs from his earlier band, Geordie. Pre-AC/DC, he is in a band called Geordie from 72 up to 78, give or take. And the material that was recorded during that time frame is what's used. And so they then remixed it in 1982. And it's basically like a greatest hits of Geordie the band. In fact, it's a cool box set out right now by Geordie, so you can get all of that early stuff, those 4 albums that he was part of. But then there's Brian Johnson, and it's Geordie Revisited, which is basically the same thing as this, although the track listing is different. Some that are on here are not on there, and vice versa. And there's a bit of a sound difference on it as well. So I don't know if they were separately remixed or just a remastering that's been done on it or something to that nature. But I really like this one, the one that actually came out under Brian Johnson's Strange Man, and they promoted it as, solo album from the lead singer. When I found this, it blew my mind back in the day, and just fell in love with it. I didn't know at the time, though, that it was songs from Geordie until digging into more history of AC/DC, which I love because a lot of these albums have opened me up to other bands. And Geordie is definitely a band you should explore. So this is a current box set that is out there where you can get on CD the remixed material that was the solo album, but you also get the original 70s era material. So that's cool. You can definitely check that out. There's another version out there that's simply called Keep On Rockin', of which is an amazing song. You should definitely check that out it's on any of the albums. So whichever Brian Johnson solo album you find, check out the song Keep On Rockin', and you'll definitely be rocking, I guess, out to the whole thing. I think it was very cool because, of course, they were cashing in on the success of Back in Black. But I actually think that this album stands on its own because they took the material and remixed it to sound like it was present day 80s. And it just came across with so much power, so much more strength, I think, than Geordie ever had. But then, of course, that's just my personal taste in terms that I actually like 80s sounding material usually better than 70s. But as I said, that's just me. You may actually really like the Geordie albums themselves from the 70s far better, and they do rock. Don't get me wrong, they do rock. So check those out as well. All right, next one is one I've actually talked a lot about in some other videos. I'm throwing it in here because it's just how much I believe in this album and have really always enjoyed it. Saxophonist Bobby Keys' self-titled one and only album from 1972. There's a laundry list of people on the back of here that guessed on this thing, which is why I picked this up. But Bobby Keys is an in-demand, or was an in-demand session musician at the time, and he had played with the Rolling Stones, John Lennon, George Harrison, Eric Clapton, Leonard Skinner, to name just a few of the artists that he's played with. But when I flipped this album over to see those guests, it was a lot of the ones that he had played with. So we've got George Harrison, Ringo Starr, Dave Mason, Leslie West, Nicky Hopkins, Jack Bruce. There's a total of 15 guests on this album. And so he basically just called up all his friends, people that he had recorded with to make this album. And of course, they were happy to do it, but the album has so much energy to it. I don't know why it wasn't more successful. I don't know why it, didn't do, didn't make more of these, except that it probably because it wasn't successful. It is an instrumental album, but it's basically like an amazing Rolling Stones album with killer lead saxophone on it. And you know, the saxophone that you're hearing in the Rolling Stones material, most of it is Bobby Keys. There's other people that have done it, but he certainly did a lot with the band. So definitely recommend checking this out. The opening track on here, Steal from a King, will tell you everything you need to know. If you listen to that, you'll just keep on listening to it. It's that good. Okay, next one, Patrick Simmons, Arcade, 1983. Only just recently found this one a few years back. Actually, it might have been during the pandemic. Had a lot of time to research albums and things. I think a lot of you guys began exploring or expanding your collections based on that. And I found this one during that time. It's the debut solo album from the Doobie Brothers guitarist. Now at the time, it was former because the Doobie Brothers had broken up at that point. Of course, Doobie Brothers are back together, so he's still there. But even though this album's from 1983, it also has that disco flavor rock sound to it. It's definitely a rock album. It definitely sounds like the Doobie Brothers, but it's got some cool elements to it that bring it across in that disco flavor, which I find as a very interesting mix in rock music when that happens. But like the Doobie Brothers albums, we've got funk, soul, R&B, blues. We have all of that in here, just done very well. And again, it boggles my mind why this album wasn't more successful, than it was at the time, and why it's just gone under the radar ever since. But track number 2, So Wrong, and number 3, Don't Make Me Do It, are just killer grooving songs that sound like they're ripped right out of the 70s, that could have been on any Doobie Brothers album. I think give it a listen, check out those tracks. If you're a Doobie Brothers fan, you will really enjoy this album. Definitely highly recommend it. All right, we're whittling it down here. This one here, Grace Slick, Dreams from 1980. It is her second solo album. Again, this one just recently reissued. I think there's been some other versions of this out there over the years, but this is a recent reissue. So second solo album. Of course, she was with Jefferson Airplane, Jefferson Starship, and Starship before ultimately retiring. Of her 4 solo albums, this is actually the most successful of them. So some of you may be saying, oh, well, I know that one, and maybe I should have picked one of her other ones that was less successful, but this is the best of those, and it's one of the ones that was interestingly was the last one that I picked up. But I think that was just because I had not found it on CD. Once it got reissued, I picked it up. So this one here, you know, it did rise up to number 32 on the Billboard charts, but the single, the one and only single Dreams, which is an amazing track, the one I want to talk to you about, only peaked at number 95 on the Billboard Hot 100. And I just find that to be a real shame because the song Dreams is so epic. Basically, the way I describe it is, if you ever wanted to know what it would have been like if Grace Slick and Jim Steinman, you know, from Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell, were to come together and work together, that's what this would have been. Jim Steinman did not write the song, but it is that type of song. It's big, it's over the top, it's theatrical, it's symphonic, it's simply amazing. The song, though, is actually written by Sean Delaney, who worked a lot with Kiss. And this in no way sounds like a Kiss song, but I mean that in the best way. I love Kiss. I'm a huge Kiss fan. But when I found out Sean Delaney wrote this, I was shocked. I was thinking, man, why wasn't he writing this sort of stuff with Kiss? Although, I guess Kiss being more the straight-ahead rock band, it doesn't really fit for them. But this song is amazing. So check out Grace Slick, the song Dreams, but of course also the album Dreams. All right, and our last one here goes to Jim Steinman, since I was just talking about him. Bad for Good, 1981, one and only solo album from him. Of course, he's the writer of one of the most successful albums in music history, Meatloaf's 1977 Bat Out of Hell, which has sold 14 million copies in the US alone, but 40 million around the world. It is one of the biggest all-time selling debut albums, you know, in anyone's career. Songs on Bad for Good, though, is really interesting sort of history or story behind it, which is they were meant as the follow-up to Bat Out of Hell. However, Meatloaf's voice had given out and he was recovering, and I guess it was taken longer than anticipated. And so the label asked Jim Steinman to record it and release it as a solo album. And that's how we get this. But the songs, everything that's on here, was supposed to be Bat Out of Hell too. So I've really always kind of thought of it that way. And it's crazy that it wasn't successful. Had, of course, it been put out under the name Meatloaf, it probably would have been hugely successful, but it has managed to achieve cult-like status. And the thing is, a lot of these songs have actually been re-recorded by Meatloaf over the years. So we do get those versions of it. Maybe one day we'll get lucky enough that they will actually pull together all of the songs and create this album, but sung by Meatloaf, which I think could be pretty cool. The thing is, you know, this album was ignored much the same way that Meatloaf's albums without Jim Steinman were kind of ignored. So we have sort of the same effect happening. Meatloaf wasn't involved in this. People didn't seem to care, and vice versa the other way around on it. But this album has a lot of the same characteristics as Bat Out of Hell. I think it has just as many standout tracks on it, some of which would be later re-recorded, as I said, by Meatloaf. But Rock and Roll Dreams Come Through, Out of the Frying Pan and Into the Fire, and Lost Boys and Golden Girls all made Bat Out of Hell too. They were all done on that album. So a lot of you guys actually know songs from this album, and you just have never heard this album. Maybe you've overlooked it simply because it wasn't a Meatloaf album. But very good album, highly recommended. Anyone I've ever talked to about this album says the same thing. This album is amazing, and they don't know why more people don't know about it. But there you go. That's 10 little known albums that are great. Now you guys know about them and can explore them. But what little known album do you think is great that you think deserves more attention? Leave those down in the comments. Let's discuss that. I'm sure there are hundreds, if not thousands, of albums that we could all come up with that are great, that barely anyone knows about. But that's always the cool thing about being a music fan and being able to share that sort of information with other cool music fans like yourself out there. All right, everyone, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.